Hello, and welcome back to the Ninox Learning Channel. My name is Andy. I'm a Ninox programmer and trainer with Nioxus Corporation. A few classes ago, we looked at dashboards and triggers in our accounts receivable module. In our most recent class last week, we looked at how we could duplicate data in one stack or data family and move that duplicate into an entirely different stack or family of data. We're going to use the features and functions that we learned about in that last class in this class here today when we talk about how to print and produce PDFs or creating PDF layouts in your Ninox solution. And we're also going to look at a very specific feature. How do you print embedded views? This is something that lots of people want to do. It's not complicated, but there's some special tricks you need to know to make it work. And as we continue looking at different modules in our Nioxus ERP solution suite, we looked at accounts receivable. Last week we looked at job cost and project management. In this class, we're going to be looking at our accounts payable and purchase order and vendor management module. If you would like to follow along in the module with the class, go ahead and go to nioxus.com, www.nioxus.com, and log in to the member portal. Any deluxe, basic, or premier member will be able to access the Solution Applications menu, and right at the top is Accounts Payable with Purchase Order. Scroll down to the bottom of the screen where it says Download O2 Accounts Payable. That's the O2 module for Accounts Payable. And you'll be able to follow along and do everything we're doing in this training class and have a fully developed and fully operational Accounts Payable and Purchase Order module that you can use on your desktop or as part of your Ninox solutions. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we get into the actual functionality that we're going to study today, creating print layouts and printing embedded multi-record views, let's take a quick tour of the Accounts Payable module. Where Accounts Receivable focused on our customers and the things we sell to them through customer invoicing, Accounts Payable is the mirror opposite. We focus on vendors, the things we buy from our vendors, the things they sell to us, and the purchase orders that we cut to authorize those purchases and the subsequent cash disbursements or accounts payable checks that we would cut to pay our vendors for the things we've purchased and they've delivered. We start with a basic utilities screen where we can set up our default company logo, a ship to, and a bill to address. Of course, you can't have accounts payable and purchase order management unless you've got some way to track your vendors. And here we see a basic vendor or supplier management screen. And throughout this training class, I'll use the word vendor or supplier. I'll use those terms interchangeably to mean the same thing. And then finally, there is the document that makes it all happen, the purchase order. The document, the order that we send to a vendor that says, we want to buy this stuff, send it to us, deliver it to us, and we will pay you this amount. This is the order for purchase, the purchase order that is part of the payable system. First, let's look at where the print feature is so crucial. We have this form view on screen. And of course, we can have any number of listing views on the screen. Here we would have a list. Now we only have one vendor, but this is a list, would be a list of all of the vendors in our record. These views, whether it is a view that is a form, one screen with all fields for one record, or some kind of multi-record listing where we have some fields for all records, this is content delivered to the screen. If you want to print what you see on screen in a view, you can go under the gear menu or the options menu and select print view. And you will get a PDF output of exactly what you see on screen. No matter what kind of view it is, you can print it and see exactly in a PDF or in hard copy what you see on the screen. But what if we want to enhance the production? What if we want to enhance the asset that Ninox produces, the PDF that comes out of the system? And let me show you what I mean by enhanced. We want to see all of the data on this screen, but we don't want to see it exactly the way it appears on screen. We want to see it in a format that is more what people expect when you say, I'll send you a purchase order. We want to see something that looks a little more like this. And I'm going to go ahead and produce a purchase order. And with that purchase order now downloaded, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And let's shrink it down so we can see the whole thing on screen. And here we see a formatted output. It's all of the same data that we saw on the purchase order entry screen in Ninox a moment ago, but things are moved around. We have some colors. We have the purchase order stamp, which indicates what kind of document it is. We have the name of our company and website at the bottom. It is a different production. It is a different view or different layout of the same content. We can do this because in Ninox, there is one engine that produces the on-screen view, and there is a separate engine that produces the layout for our offline or PDF or output view. This is what we see on screen. This is how that screen content gets turned into a print layout. Let's look at how we produce these print layouts. The first thing you're going to want to do is get into form mode. Again, if you're looking at a list of all of the records in a table, and here we see all of the purchase orders in our purchase order table, you want to select one record so you are in form view. So you see all of the fields for just one record. If you direct your attention towards the top right-hand corner, you'll see a pod of icons. We have our administrative wrench on the far right, and on the other side, on the far left of that pod, we have this printer icon. If we click on the printer icon, this takes us into the print production engine. This is where we design the layout, the form or format of assets or reports, things that we want Ninox to produce outside the Ninox system. Not views within the system, but PDFs and reports and outputs that can exist outside of and exclusive of Ninox. You can think of this as a view, but it is a very special kind of view. It's a view that will be rendered by Ninox automatically as a PDF. As you are used to with views, you can create as many different views for any table, and you do so by clicking on this plus sign. What you are looking at is a view that I laid out in preparation for this training class. This is the end state that we want to get to. Now there's some little tricks and some fancy items that you see on screen that I want to show you how we did this so you can create really nice looking purchase orders and customer invoices, packing slips and shipping notices, whatever you want to output, even paychecks or membership reports or attendance lists for your class or church group. I want to show you how you can produce these great looking reports using the Ninox report production engine. This is what we want to get to. Let's start with a blank screen and see how we get there. I'm going to click on the plus sign, and I'm going to create a new view, and I'll just call this PO number 2. And PO number 2, I want to start with an empty screen. I could have duplicated the exact content of the screen we see. I could have gone with auto, which is how Ninox just takes all of the fields and lays them out in a columnar layout. In this case, I want to start with a blank, empty piece of paper and lay everything out myself. Now, there are a number of slight differences. There's some big differences, but there's some things that I want you to be aware of when you're in the print engine. The first thing is there is no wrench. You are always in administrative mode when you are in the Ninox print engine. How do you know you're in the engine? You're going to see the paper format at the very top of the panel on the right. This is the only time you would see a panel that looks like this. You're going to see the printer icon highlighted in blue in the top right-hand corner. And you're going to see some slightly different icons here in the center of your screen. This is what we call the print or the Ninox output engine. This plus sign is crucial. This is where you access or select and add all of the different components that make up the output. So every one of these things that we saw here on this purchase order screen came out of this plus sign. Before we start putting objects on our screen, let's first lay out the screen. Again, there are some big differences. There are some subtle differences in the output production engine versus the inline or the in Ninox view layout engine. One of those subtle differences, you're always in administrative mode. One of the big differences, it is a true WYSIWYG drag and drop interface. WYSIWYG means what you see is what you get. So there is no hard-coded XY grid. You can put anything, anywhere. You can overlap objects and layers. This is a very sophisticated print engine that gives us lots of features and functions that we have not seen elsewhere in the Ninox system. One of the things that we can do in this WYSIWYG environment is lay out the form and format, the actual shape of our output. And we do that using the paper format menu. There are a number of defaults. I'm going to use the US letter default. This is 8.5 by 11, 8.5 inches wide, 11 inches tall, with a small border at the top and bottom. Using the palette over on the right, I can change the size of my header and footer using these two fields here. I can change my header and make it a little bit taller, or just if I want to be very specific, and make it 50 units tall. And at the bottom, I can expand my footer to be 20 units tall. I might want to expand my margins or make my margins smaller. I can do all of those things using the palette, the tools palette in the print engine over on the right-hand side. But this is a pretty basic layout. If you're laying out what I would call office or business management forms, customer invoices, vendor purchase orders, shipping notices, overdue notices, packing slips, any of those kinds of documents, especially if you're a US-based organization, the 8.5 by 11 inch letter format with a 50-unit header and a 20-unit footer per page is a really good layout to start with. If you are outside the US or just want to go with a completely custom format, you can do that. I'm going to stick with this letter format that we've gone ahead and created. It is important to understand the three sections of our layout. There is the header section at the top. This will be produced on every output page. There's the footer section at the bottom. This will be produced at the bottom of every output page. And the center section, what we call the content section, will be produced on a page-by-page basis, which means if everything you lay out can't fit in the allocated space, which is the space left over on an 11-inch tall piece of paper after you subtract the 70 units that were allocated to the header and footer, if you don't have enough space for everything, it'll kick to a second page. If you can't fit everything on 2 pages, it will kick to a third. This becomes critical when we are printing line items. We have a purchase order, and some purchase orders will have 2 or 3 line items. It'll print on one page. Other purchase orders might have 40 or 50 line items, and it has to print on 8 or 10 pages. There is no page break in Ninox. Your page break is defined by the size of the page. So if I were to go in and make this page significantly taller and add additional content, for instance, I'm going to make it 750 units tall. I still have a 50 unit header, and I still have, way at the bottom, a 20 unit footer. But I've created a very, very large content section in the middle. This is still going to be printed out on 8.5 by 11 inch paper because of the way the margins are set up. But by expanding the amount of content in the middle, it's still 8.5 inches wide, but it's much, much taller than one 11 inch tall page can handle. So when we get to the point where we're at the bottom of the first page, any content left over would kick to a second or a third or a fourth page. If we have 50 line items, and after you deduct the space for the header and the footer, you can only have space left for 10 line items per page, Ninox will automatically produce a 5-page purchase order with this header at the top of every one of the 5 pages and this footer at the bottom of every one of the 5 pages. Let's get back to our standard 8.5 by 11 inch letter format. And that is exactly what we see in this screen right here. We've created a header of 57 units, a footer of 10 units. We have our 279 units, and this represents a single 11 inch page with our multiple line items right in the middle. This page is big enough for about 6 line items. If we get to a 7th or an 8th or a 20th or a 50th line item, it will just kick out additional pages. Now keep in mind, everything you see up here, everything that I just highlighted and selected, will be at the top of every single page in a multi-page output. And this document has a footer that consists of a single object. This object is the name of the company, the website, and the phone number, white text on a burgundy background with a black border, and because it is in the footer section, this will be produced on every outputted page in a multi-page document. All of this content in the middle, excluding the footer at the bottom and all of the header content on top, this is what is going to be produced on a page-by-page basis. So let's say that we have 6 line items. 6 line items can fit on one page. So what you will see is everything you see here on one 8.5 by 11 inch page. If we go to a 7th line item, that will force a second page. But keep in mind, this content here comes after the last line item. So if the last line item is on page 2, then all of our summary and total information will also be on page 2. If you want the PO total or the invoice total or the packing slip summary to appear at the bottom of every single page, put it in the footer. You can make your footer bigger using this parameter right here, using the up and down arrows to increase or decrease the number of units of measure, the size vertically of the footer area. Let's get back to learning how we laid out some of the cool stuff that we have here in this purchase order. I'm going to not save the changes I made and go back to my blank page and start by putting in my company logo. And the way we drop a logo onto an output form or a layout in our print production engine, a little bit different than how we would do it in our inline or Ninox viewing on-screen engine. On screen, we would either have an image or a variable selecting the content of an image in some other table. In the output engine, we're going to embed the image as a static image. We're going to select the image, and on my hard drive, I have created a JPEG file called the Acme Anvil Company logo. So I will select it. The file will be uploaded. And once it is uploaded, we can then drag it and size it exactly to be where we want and exactly to be how big we want. Again, this is the concept of what you see is what you get. This is the beauty of the drag and drop engine. You can drag it and drop it wherever you want, and what you see is exactly what you will get. I have created this 50-unit tall header, and I've created a logo that fits exactly and perfectly in that space, in that 50 units of height for the header. There was a second image that I created, and that was the image that was the purchase order stamp. Let's drop in that second static image, and that is called the PO badge. Let's go ahead and grab that. Ninox will upload the file. And I'm going to go ahead and make this not a fixed height, but a auto height, which will allow me to skinny it down. Now I could grab a corner and make it bigger or smaller. I want it to be just about that big, and I want it to be aligned, and you see that gold line? That's telling me that the purchase order stamp in the right-hand corner, the top of that stamp is exactly even with the top of the logo image in the header's left-hand side. These alignment icons are very nice. If I wanted the purchase order to be at the bottom of the logo, I would drag it down till I see the gold line at the bottom. And this tells me the top of the purchase order stamp is now at the middle point of the company logo stamp. I'm going to put it back up here on the top. If we go back, and I'm going to go back and look at purchase order number 2, I'm going to save the changes that I'm making in the PO2 layout and go back and look at my finished purchase order. We see some field content and we see some headers or field labels for that content. Again, another subtle difference. In Ninox, when you're working inline, when you're creating a view that is going to be used inside the Ninox application, the Ninox database, the name of the field and the content of the field always go hand in hand. You can hide the name, you can put the name on top, you can put the name to the left, but the field name and the field content are always inextricably linked together. Not so in our PDF print or output engine. I can go ahead and select, for example, the PO number and the PO date. Here are the two fields that I just selected, and we can see that they're both a lot wider and a lot taller than I need them to be. Let's fix that problem first by abandoning the fixed height and going to an auto height, which is Ninox's way of making sure that each field is only as tall as it needs to be to contain the content in the field. Width, that can simply be adjusted by grabbing the grab handle. We select the field, in this case click on the field, grab the grab handle, drag it in to make it narrow, drag it out to make it wide. Again, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. If you want the field to be this big, and I want both fields to be the same size, so I'm going to drag one field underneath the other until I see my gold line aligning left, and then drag the second one out till I see the gold line aligning right. Now I have two fields of identical width. If I want the content centered, I select one field, go over to my alignment options, and center it horizontally, and again, center it horizontally. Now you will notice here that I've got the content of my field, but I don't have the field label. You create field labels by adding text. This means you can label a field on an output form differently than you would label it on an inline or an on-screen viewing form. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to use the back arrow to go back to the screen, saving the changes I've made so far, and let's take a look at this field. I'll go into administrative mode and highlight the purchase order number field. The name of the field is PO number. In this case, the content of the field is the numeric value 1001. But this is our inline or our on-screen viewing engine. If I want to go into my output engine, I click back on the printer. I select some raw text by selecting text, and I can now type a field label. On screen, it says PO number. Here, I want it to say purchase order number. I'm going to use the hash mark or the crosshatch as the abbreviation for number. I want it in all caps, but I want to specify the height. I want to specify that it should be 15 characters tall. So let's go ahead and go back to fixed height. Let's fix our height at 15 characters. And let's now center over here horizontally and down here vertically. I also want to do some graphic enhancement by giving this a burgundy background, a black border of 2 pixels, and I want the color of the font to be white. And while we're speaking of font, I want to go with Courier, and I want it to be 14 characters tall. This is going to be the PO number field label. And as I look at it, 15 is a little tall. Let's take that down to 10. Let's move it right there so it's perfectly vertically centered under the PO label or tag. And let's then drag the purchase order number field underneath it. Let's make the field as wide as the label above it. I'll use my arrow keys to move it down a little bit. That can be a little bit bigger. Now I want to have a purchase order date label identical to the purchase order number label. I've already got the field. I need the field label. Another outstanding difference between the print production engine and the inline view engine in Ninox. In the print production engine, we can create something once and use it over and over and over again with this icon right here, the duplicate icon. I select the label, I create a duplicate, and I drag it exactly where I want. This is where I want it, below the purchase order number, lined up perfectly on a left-hand margin with this block above it. Double click to change this to purchase order date. And now I see that my header isn't quite big enough. I click on the margin so nothing is selected, go back to my header area, and let's make it just a little bit bigger. Let's increase it to 60 units of measure. In fact, let's just go ahead and type in 70 units of measure. And let's drop in the date content, left aligned, right below the date label. Use my arrow key to move it down 1 pixel, expand it to 12-point font. I've got a nice little header here. In the header, on every single page, I also want the name of the vendor that I'm sending this PO to appear right underneath my label. Go to the plus sign. In this case, I'm going to grab the vendor name. But where is it? I can't find my vendor. Let's go back and see what we're dealing with here. Save your layout changes. We can clearly see that there is a reference to the vendor right here on the screen. This reference field is a reference from the purchase order table to the vendor table, and it is bringing back the name of the vendor code concatenated in between a left and a right parenthesis, and then the tag phone number with the primary phone number of the vendor displayed on the far right of the field. So we can see it's there. It's there in the screen view. Here is another subtle difference. Actually, this is kind of a big difference. When you are producing a view for the screen, you have access to all the fields of the current table, in this case, the purchase order table, and you also have access to all the fields in any other table using the select statement, using formulas, or linking either through an outer join or an inner join to child tables, all of the other content of a different table. When you are in the Ninox print engine, you only have direct access to the fields and the objects of the current table. Here on the screen, we see that the vendor content is not part of the current table. It is being referenced. It is actually part of the vendor table. So we know that we don't have direct access to the content of other tables in our PDF or print engine. How do we do it? With indirect access. We put in a formula. Drop a formula onto the screen of your output format or layout engine. We'll bring up the Ninox language or programming editor that we all are very used to by now. And here we see the reference to that other table, the vendor table. Open it up, grab the vendor name, that is the formula, and click OK, and there it is. There is the vendor name. We didn't have direct access to it. We created a formula which gave us indirect access to it. But now, since we're in this WYSIWYG engine, we can do some interesting things with this piece of content. I'm going to delete this and show you how we can do some really cool stuff. Again, I'm going to create a formula. The formula is going to be the name of the vendor, but I want to make sure, irrespective of how that name was entered, it's always presented in the print engine in all uppercase. Great. Now it has the right case structure. All letters in the name in uppercase. I want to center it in the field. I want the field to only be tall enough to hold the content in the field. But I want the content to be 14 points, but still on one line. So let's drag it out a little bit. I want it bold. I want the color of the font to be white. I want the border to be black. And I want the background to be burgundy. This is what I want at the top of every page for this PO. How do you get something to print on every page at the top in a multi-page output? You put it in the header. The gold line on the left tells me I'm aligned on the left with the company icon. The horizontal line tells me that the exact center of the vendor name is aligned with the exact center of the purchase order date content. And that is the layout that I want. I'm going to go ahead and go back and save my changes and come right back into the print layout engine. Quick fine tuning. I'm going to grab this tool, select these four objects, the two header objects and the two field content objects, and use my down arrow to nudge them down so they're not quite so close to the purchase order stamp in the top right-hand corner. Now what we're going to do is lay out the objects that make up the body of our purchase order. Let's go back and see what that is. Let's leave PO2, this new purchase order layout or form format that we're creating. Let's go back and look at the original purchase order layout, save our changes, and we can see that we have the vendor name. Now in this layout, the vendor name appears at the top of the first page, but we have the name of the person who placed the order at the top of every page. If it's in the header, it's at the top of every page. If it's in the body area, it is on the page where that fits. This being the very, very top of the body, this is going to be the very, very top of page 1. I used raw text or this text option to create the vendor field label. I then embedded the actual field that appears on the screen, but I used indirect access by using a formula. There's the formula, the vendor name field out of the vendor table with the period or the dot separating the table reference from the field reference. But I also have some other cool stuff. The ship to address, the bill to address, nice great big headers in black. I've got a nice color break right here where I have the basic information of my payment terms, the payment due date, when the vendor has told me these items will ship, and when I can expect to receive them, and then the line items themselves. Let's go ahead and lay these things out in our new screen. Let's start with the most obvious. Let's lay out the line items. The line items are an embedded table. Let's go look at our data model to understand what we're dealing with. I'm going to go back to my Ninox desktop in administrative mode, click on data model. Here I see my purchase order family, and one of the children of that family are the line items. In Ninox, you can view all of the child records of any parent on screen, and you can print all of the children of any parent. You can print them into a PDF format if you want to output that content. I go into my output engine. Here is some basic parent table content. The PO number, the PO date, an indirect reference to the name of the vendor to which this PO is being delivered, the vendor that's going to supply me with all of the line items in this purchase order. We can very easily lay out those line items by simply selecting the object that is the embedded child view, and there it is, perfectly centered on my screen. We have complete control. Remember WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, and here's what I want to get. I'm going to select the line item section, the child records, the individual line item child records for this purchase order. I'm going to select the whole section right there and going to go to Edit Columns. I want the item code, the item description, the quantity, and the line total only. Don't want the unit price, going to hide that column. This gives me the information that I want. I'm going to select the item code column and skinny it up, which will give me more room to select the item description column and push it out so it's a little bit wider. Skinny up the quantity, skinny up the line total, push out the item description. And I want totals. I want to know how many items are in the PO, how many units are in the PO, and the total price of the PO. Again, select the embedded child object. Go to Edit Columns and do what you've always done. Count the number of items, sum up the quantity of items, and sum up all of our line totals, And now we have the totals for this particular purchase order. 3 items, 54 units in the order, with an order total due of $1,190 US. I can continue formatting my children by adding a border style. Select the embedded child object, click on border style. Let's go with this one. That's starting to look pretty good. Now, if I only wanted the line item content itself and wanted to create a JPEG image to be my header, or wanted to use formulas in my footer, I could hide the header or the footer by selecting the embedded child object and deselecting the header and the footer options. Header on, header off. Footer on, footer off. Let's go ahead and leave them both on. And let's move this left justified. The gold line tells me it's lined up perfectly in the left margin with the company logo and the vendor name in the header. Let's drop it right about the middle of the content area, or the body of my purchase order form layout. Let's go back out. Again, always save your changes. And let's take a look at the view on screen. We've got payment terms, that's a choice field. Payment due date, estimated ship date, estimated receipt date. Let's go ahead and drop those in to create that nice red border we had in our original print layout. Remember, we had this nice border right here that kind of divides the top area of the content, or the body, with the bottom area of the body. Let's see how we did this. Let's go into our new document. Let's create some more text. The text will be, I don't know, let's say payment terms in all caps. I want it to be exactly 8 units tall. I want horizontal and vertical centering. Remember, I'm leaving it at fixed height, and I've specified a height of 8 units of measure. I want this header to be bold. I want it to be on a burgundy body with white characters with a 1 character black border. And I want it right here, right at the very top of the content section, lined up, perfectly left aligned with the line item object beneath it, the vendor name, and the company logo object above it. And I'm going to skinny it down to about that. This gold line on the right tells me it is now exactly as wide as the company logo that appears in the top left of the header. I want 3 more boxes that look exactly like this one. With this box selected, duplicate once, twice, and a 3rd time. And now let's do the layout. The line horizontally tells me that the second payment terms box is at the exact height of the first one. The gold vertical line going down the middle means they're right next to each other. Let's line up the 3rd box the same way. Let's skinny these down. Let's get that 3rd one out of the way. Let's skinny that one down so it is exactly 35 characters wide. Let's make this one also exactly 35 characters wide and move it right next to that. Let's lay this one so it is horizontally and vertically aligned properly. Grab the grab handle and stretch it out till I see the gold line on the right, telling me it is now perfectly aligned in the right margin with all of the information on the right-hand side. The information above in the header, the multiple line items below in the rest of the body. And we'll let go. We've got our boxes laid out. We just need to change what is in the box. This is going to be payment terms. Double click, select everything. This is going to be estimated ship date. This is going to be, and I'm just double clicking, estimated receipt date. And this is going to be estimated receipt date. We are seeing here that this box is not wide enough for the content. And this box is clearly wider than it needs to be. Let's go ahead and skinny up this box and move it back to where we want it, aligned on the top with the other boxes in the same row, aligned on the left with all the other content, which gives us room to stretch this box out. The gold line between the two tells us they're right on top of each other. And now I've got a nice clean layout. If I want everything in the middle of the page, I select just those boxes and I use my left and right arrow keys to put it right where I want it. Now simply drop in the fields. Add the payment terms. Put that there for now. Add the payment due date, the estimated ship date, and the estimated receipt date. Now let's use our WYSIWYG drag and drop to make them look the way we want them to look and have them appear where we want them to appear. How do we want them to look? Centered, 12 points, auto height, with a 1-character black border. This is our estimated receipt date. I simply double-clicked the field, so instead of seeing the content of the field, I see the name of the field. Estimated receipt date goes right there. Line it up so it's top to bottom. My grab handle allows me to line it up left and right. This is my estimated ship date. I want it centered, horizontally, and vertically. I want it auto height, 12 point, 1-character, black border. Now line it up so it is vertically aligned, and let's go ahead and do that once more. Auto height, 12 characters, 1-character black border, centered vertically and horizontally. Let's get that out of the way. Drop it into position, adjust the width, and for the last time, 12 characters, horizontal and vertical alignment, 1-character, black border, auto height. Drag it into position. It's now aligned across the top. Scooch it over until I see the line telling me it's now aligned on the right, and grab the grab handle and bring it back till it's aligned on the left. What does this look like when we print it? This is what the layout looks like. It's going to look exactly like this when we print it because WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. We now move this right below that top section. And if I want to drop in my totals, I can do that. And I'm just going to, in the interest of time, drop in just the PO total, which is, in this case, $1,190. I want this right aligned. I want it 14 font. I want it to be white on a black field, just tall enough, pushed all the way to the right, and lined up with the estimated receipt date. And finally, I'm going to push this all the way down to the bottom, giving myself all of this space for all of my line items. The last thing we're going to do is drop in our footer. Remember what our footer looks like. Let's go back and look at the original purchase order. Save the changes, and here we see at the bottom this footer of the company name, the website, and the phone number. Let's drop that in there. We're just going to use text. My text field, double click, and type in all caps the Acme Anvil Company, couple of spaces, www.acmeanvils.com, 2 more spaces, and the phone number. Drag it out so it's the entire width of the page, or at least exactly as wide as the line items above. I want it big, so I'm going to select everything and make it 12 points. I want it in Courier, centered. I want it to be a fixed height of exactly, let's make it 10 characters. I want it to have a black border of 2 pixels, and I want it to be on a body of burgundy. And there we go. Got to change the font color. Select it, click on the T for text, select white font, and then finally, yes, I have it centered horizontally. Use this icon right here to center it vertically. And because I want it at the bottom of every single page, drag it into my footer area. My footer area is bigger than it needs to be. This single object is only 10 units tall. I can see here that my footer is 20 units tall. I'm wasting space. If I make the footer only 12 units tall, that's enough space to have my footer image in it with 1 blank pixel above and below, which now allows me to move this down and have even more space for line items. So here's a pretty good layout of a purchase order. I'm going to go back to screen view, and I'm going to say yes to save the changes to the layout. Now that we have an output layout, I would like to automate the process of producing the output. There is a manual way to do it. Click on the print icon. That'll bring up your layout. Click on the printer. Indicate that you want to print all 3 line item records. It'll ask you where you want the output to go. I'm going to just put it on my desktop. Save it. And now I have an output that looks like this. This WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get engine, combined with the drag and drop capability, really allows us to create some beautiful looking output. So let's review all of this information that we've now gone over. First, and most importantly, remember, if we want to access the output engine, we do that by going into a form view, 1 record of our current table. We're laying out the output for the current table. We click on the printer icon. That takes us to the layout screen for the print engine. We can lay out graphic objects like this by selecting a static image. We can lay out formulas like this by selecting a formula. And if we double click, we can see the formula. This is an indirect reference because remember, print or output formats only are directly accessing the fields in the table that the print layout is associated with. These are all the fields in the PO and formulas in the purchase order table. This content is in a different table, so we have to use a formula to create the indirect link. We've dropped in some field headers here and here, and with these 4 items right there, and we simply did that using the text option. Here we have some fields that are part of the current table: PO number and date, payment terms, and the date when we can expect payment to be made, shipment to get out, and shipment to be received. What you just saw me do a moment ago was select multiple items using my lasso. I also can select multiple items by holding down my shift key, selecting an item, holding down my shift key, and selecting other items. And I now can work on these items in a block if I want to. And one of the things that I can do with these block of items is get rid of them. If I want to get rid of one thing, I select that one thing and hit the trash can icon, and it is gone. This cannot be undone. There is no Command Z, there is no undo. If you want to put it back, you have to reselect it, reformat it, and replace it in its proper position on the layout. So keep in mind that throwing away or deleting things can't be undone, but you can do it with the simple click of the trash can. And if you want to throw multiple things away, use your lasso or the shift key option to select all of those things. Go ahead and click the trash can, and they're gone like that. I'm going to leave this screen, but say no. I do not want to save these changes. I want to keep everything intact, even the stuff that I just showed you how to delete. I showed you a moment ago the manual way to get the output. From Form View, click on the printer to enter the output production engine, or the form engine, and click on this blue printer in the top right-hand corner to actually create the output. Ninox asks where you want it to go. I'm going to save it to my desktop. I now have a PDF, and we say inline versus outside. An inline view happens in Ninox. These PDFs, these are independent assets. They can be emailed, they can be stored in files. These exist outside of the Ninox system. However, there's a better way to print. Let's look at what I did here in this system. And let's remember, we have this print layout that includes my ship to address and my bill to address. All this was done ahead of time. Let's go back and look at a little trick we have when we want to print our purchase order. All of our data has been entered, and I want to print it. Instead of clicking the printer once, clicking the printer twice, and going through that whole routine, I just click on the logo. And Ninox asks me where I want it. I want it on my desktop. I save it to my desktop, and there's my PO. And again, I'll shrink it down so you can see the entire thing on screen. This automated printing function was done using a couple of new features. The first one is the ability to store an image as a formula. We did that here. This icon, this corporate logo, and I'm going to go into administrative mode, is actually a formula. And the formula is selecting the company logo, which is being stored in the utilities table as an image. So we go here to utilities. One time we uploaded the image that is the company logo. I can now use that image any place I want by referring to it in a formula. And here's the formula. Select the contents of the company logo field in the utilities table. But there's something else I can do. Thanks to Ninox version 2.6, I can click on formulas and get something to happen. Not only is this image the company logo that I want to appear on screen when entering purchase order data, it's a clickable hotspot. And what happens when I click it? This line of code is executed. I select a record, the purchase order table, specifically this record. I'm referring to the record I see on screen, and I can do that with the ID, capital I, lowercase d, keyword. The parameters for the record function is a reference to the name of the table, and then a reference to the single record in that table that I want to point to. So this block of code here is pointing to the current purchase order on screen, that record in the purchase order table. What do I want to do with the record that I'm pointing to? I want to print it. The print record function, note all lowercase except the R in record, takes two parameters. The first parameter is the record I want to print, and that's this code right there. The second parameter, in double quotation marks, is the name of the print format that I want to use to output this content. This is the content, the current record of the purchase order table. This is pointing to that record. This is going to print that record, and it's going to make the printout look like whatever this format looks like. And all of that's going to happen when I click this logo formula. Let's see it in action. Exit administrative mode. Here's my PO. Click the logo. A little magic happens behind the scenes, and my PO's ready to go. Save it to screen. Open it up. Ready to go. This has been, I hope, a good primer for you, a good introduction to the Ninox print engine. We've covered a lot of material, so you may want to take a break, take a deep breath, maybe grab yourself a cup of tea, because we're not quite done yet. I want to answer one question that is absolutely the number one question I get, that all of us get it here at the Nioxus Help Desk. And that question is, how do I print an embedded view? There are two kinds of embedded views. There is this child table. Again, remember, go back to the data model, and we can confirm that purchase order line items is a child of the purchase order. So if I have created a print format in the purchase order table, this one that we were working on together, and this one called purchase order, these are associated with the parent table. Children of the parent are selectable objects when laying out the report format of the parent. Simply dragging this object on the screen gives me a second view. I already had this one here. And here we see a second view of all of my line items. I'm going to select and delete that like that. However, if it's not a child view and we want to view multiple line items on screen, the only way to do that is using the layout element view. Let's go look at a spot where we have done exactly that in the system. Let's go look at our vendors. Let's bring up this one vendor, the Smith Brothers Hardware Company. And I see all of the information for Smith Brothers, and I see an embedded view. Let's look at our data model. Here we see our vendor table. You will notice that vendors does have a child, but that one and only child is just where we name the people who work at this vendor company. There is no relationship between the vendor file and the line items table. Now you may be thinking, well, wait a minute. Line items is a child of the parent purchase order, and the parent purchase order is linked to the parent vendor table. This creates a link that we can use for inline or on-screen viewing. It does not work in the print engine. There is no direct relationship between a single vendor company and all of the line items of all of the purchase orders that were cut to that vendor. However, I'm able to see them on screen because this is a view. I went into Layout Elements and selected View. And then I went into that view object and created a very small, short code block that said, create a variable called current record. I use the X prefix so I know it's a variable. And in that variable, store a pointer pointing to the current record on screen. That's this vendor right here. So what we've done is we have created a variable that is pointing to the current record. Then select all purchase order line items where the purchase order parent of the line item has been cut to a vendor equal to the current vendor we're looking at. Follow the path. Parent table, purchase order. A field in the parent table, vendor. Child table, purchase order line items. Child has a reference to parent. Parent has a reference to vendor. And we specify this vendor. Select all line items of all purchase orders where the vendor defined in the purchase order parent record is the vendor we're looking at right now. And then display them as a view on screen. So far, so good. So here we see two embedded views in our inline form screen view. This embedded view of contacts is a view of child records that are the children of the parent. This embedded view is a layout element that I accessed in administrative mode by embedding a view. Look at how these are treated differently by Ninox. Let's access the print engine. Let's create a new view. Let's start with and I'll just call this my demo view. And we'll look at an empty screen. What do we have to work with? We see the contacts that are the children of this vendor. This was easy because this contacts table is a related child of the vendor. But what I want is, and I'm going to say yes to save changes, I want this view. I want the purchase order line items, not the PO header. The purchase order line items to appear in the print layout. And this is where I hit a brick wall because that embedded view is not an option anywhere on screen in this drop-down listing. And even if I go to formula, there is still no object. There is no formula that will allow me to capture this embedded view, which is the purchase order detail history. How do I get the line items onto the format that I want to use to print a purchase detail vendor by vendor? And the answer is you can't. Ninox doesn't do it. But there's a trick that makes Ninox work exactly the way you want it to. Remember this rule. It is the most important rule when dealing with how we print embedded views. You can print the multi-line embedded child or child records of a parent. You can't print a multi-line or multi-record embedded view. To get the output we want, we must change these unlinked, unrelated, undirectly related children of the purchase order family. We must turn them into children of the vendor. Enter the phantom table, the table that we need but never see. If I am not in administrative mode, I simply see my vendor table, my purchase order table, my utilities table. But if I go into administrative mode and I look at my data model, there is this phantom family, the family that exists that is never seen. And this family consists of a parent and child line items. This particular family, this phantom family, looks like this. Very similar to what we saw a moment ago. All of my vendor data and all of the line items associated with that vendor. But note the relationship difference. Here, when looking at the line items, we put in an embedded view, which was a window into the line item children of this family. Here, there's no embedded view. These are child records. And as we know, the children of a parent can be printed, can be embedded as a multi-record embedded object in the print format of the parent. Let's go look at that print format. We go into our Phantom table, we access the print engine, and there's exactly what we want. The code of the vendor, the name of the vendor, and every line item from every PO that we ever cut to this vendor. Because these vendor print line records are children of the Phantom parent vendor print table. You will notice the table is hidden. We don't ever work directly with it. We simply take advantage of the family structure by doing this. I go into my vendor table. Remember, this is an embedded view. Embedded views cannot be printed in a print format. Here's the print format for this parent table, and there's no view that gives me the line items. But I have created a workaround. When I click this button, it produced an output. I will save the output to my desktop. And when I look at the output, sure enough, vendor code, vendor name, all the line items. But this output is not associated with this current vendor table. Let's take a look at the little bit of magic that we used to get the result we wanted by taking advantage of what Ninox can do and ignoring what we thought it couldn't do. Ninox can't produce an output for a table that includes the multiple records in a view. Fine, Ninox can produce the multi-records in a view if it's a child view. So we created a button, and what does that button do? That button creates a record in the vendor print table. This is our Phantom table. And then for every line item where the vendor on the PO header record is equal to our current vendor, it creates a vendor print line. This is a child of the header record in the Phantom table. And we created this for loop so all of the records that we want to see, all the records that were in the embedded view, now are children of the parent record. When we're done, we select the Phantom vendor print table, specifically the record I. That's the record that we just created. This is pointing to a specific record in a specific table, the current record in the Phantom vendor print table. And what are we doing with that record? We are printing the record. This is the record we're printing. This is the format that we're using for the print output. And as soon as we're done, we delete all those records and get rid of them because we don't need the records to exist in the Phantom table. The purpose of the Phantom table, it is an invisible table that is not apparent, doesn't appear anywhere, and doesn't get any data entered manually into it, and never has any data into it. This Phantom table exists for one reason and one reason only. So we can create an output format with the unrelated line items of every PO associated with the vendor. We can see those line items with an embedded view, but embedded views can't be printed. So we take the vendor information out of the vendor family and move all that information into a different family. Remember the training class from last week when we copied all of the content in one stack or family of data and put that copied data into a different family. We copied the one vendor record in this family's parent table and put the copy or the duplicate in this different family. This different family has a print layout that recognizes child records. This button created child records in this for loop immediately after it created the parent record in the phantom table. And then we simply used a line of code in this button that said, print the record you just created. That's the record being pointed to in the variable I. Print that record in the phantom table, make the output look like what I've created for the print format called vendor detail, produce that PDF output, get rid of all the content when you're done. So all of this is happening on the back end. All we see on the front end is I select a vendor, I click the button that says print vendor transaction history. I wait a second or two, and there's my output. It looks like the output came out of this table and included the stuff that I see on screen. And it does. But behind the scenes, we know this was produced in a different format, in a different table, of a different family, with a unique set of children that were temporarily created so they could be printed. And the minute after they got printed, in fact, the second after they were printed, they were deleted because they no longer needed to exist. They only existed long enough to get them into the PDF. And that is the answer to the question, how does Ninox print the multiple records in an embedded view of a non-related table? I think that's a great little trick. I hope you like it as much as I do. And I hope you've enjoyed this, albeit lengthy, hopefully informative class on all of the different ways we can print and produce artifacts and output outside of the Ninox system. This has been a long class, but I hope it has been a good class for you. I've enjoyed bringing it to you, and I hope you now feel a lot more confident in going into your Ninox solutions and creating these fantastic, valuable, powerful printed and outputted assets. Thank you so much for joining me here in this class today. Thank you for being part of the Ninox and Nioxus families. Thanks for taking time to be with us. Make sure to come back next week for the next edition of Ninox training here at Ninox University and the Ninox Learning Channel. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody.